In order to make your sourdough, what you need is the flour, and this is a flour mixture. Contains a little bit of rye flour. It's a special mix we use here in Sweden. It contains flour from rye and wheat, and also a little bit of malt powder, which then is going to add that flavor to the sourdough. And also I'm using strong bread flour. I have my active starter, and this has already peaked, and then it's on the receding end. So the starter has risen up to its peak and then started to diminish in energy. That's where you want to catch your starter. I also have fine sea salt and a little bit of water, so it's a little bit warm to the touch. So we start with the water. And we're going to add our starter. Depending on how long you want to ferment your dough, you use a little bit more or a little bit less. So just spread the starter out into the water. To make sure it's evenly distributed. Now I'm going to use a sieve to sift the flour mixture into the water. Now we're just going to bring this together. And let the flour activate its enzymes by itself. And all we need for that is the water. So make sure all of the flour is wet by the water, and that then will start a process of self-melting, and that will help us strengthen in the dough. And that will reduce the amount of effort we need in mixing the dough. So this is enough. Just bring it together into a rough shape. Use your scraper. Just clean your tool. and clean the bowl. Make sure you keep everything together. Now, this is ready to be put aside for 30 or up to 60 minutes. Our mixture has been resting for almost 40 minutes, and we'll see what's happened. So you can see that there are some signs of strengthening, because you see some small bubbling, and that's when it's ready to be worked. So you can grab on it and pull a little bit. So this is all done by the mixture itself, because the enzymes in the flour has been activated by the water. So now it's time to work this dough. We're going to start by mixing it so that it's evenly distributed. So just use your fingers and press down into the dough and then divide it like this. So when you're working the dough by hand, you can always feel the texture and consistency of the dough, because this is something that's alive, and you have to be there, so to speak. You have to be in its presence and give it your attention. So when you're mixing by hand, you get a feel for how wet the dough is or how dry the dough is. And then you use that experience in your future baking. So now I'll switch up technique. So I'm going to be pinching the dough between my fingers. There is no problem leaving the dough for a few seconds or a minute or so if you need to go and do something else. So you see that dough between my fingers? Just use your scraper and get that down in there. Okay, so it's important that you keep your dough together. Keep it nice and clean. Just scrape down from the sides to avoid the dough from drying out. Here's a method like this. So I'm going to grab it and run it through my fingers. So it's just resting between my fingers and thumb while I run it through. So this is going to strengthen the gluten. So far this is a very weak dough, because if you pull on it, it breaks. And it's the strength of the dough that's going to hold all those gases expanding inside the pot in the oven. You want to keep a steady pace, but you don't want to go too fast, because you don't want to work air into the dough. So you got to be gentle on hand, but steady. You can already feel the dough is changing. It's getting stronger. You can definitely feel that in your shoulder, because there is more resistance. So as you can see, the dough can hold a lot better together, but still breaks, so it needs a little bit more work. The dough now holds itself together and stays in one piece inside the bowl. The dough is now ready to receive the salt. So I'm going to add my salt. And continue working it. And it doesn't take long for the dough to completely transform by the salt. But it's important that you work through the dough thoroughly until you cannot feel the salt grains anymore. It's now time to get this dough out onto the table. To finish it off. Use your scraper to get everything out. Now use your scraper and your hand and form that skin on the dough. So you're going to spin it on top of the table. You can now see the air pockets inside the dough is now ready to be put into our bowl to rest. So you can now see that the dough has some shape to it. So this is the top side, and that's important because we need a way to handle the dough. This is now going to be put away for bulk fermentation, and that will take somewhere between 3 and 4.5 hours. But we'll be back to strengthen the dough in a while. So this now goes to the side. So it's time to check on our dough that's been resting, and I prepared a little bit of water, which is just room temperature, as a non-stick agent. So you can clearly see signs of fermentation. There's a doming of the dough and the bubbling. Since it's summertime and it's quite warm, quite humid, this is now ready to be stretched to reinforce that strength. I'm just going to wet my hands a little bit and reach down on the sides. And I'm going to grab the dough, let it stretch, and fold it onto itself. Turn it 180 degrees and repeat. So at the top side, just stretch it, let it hang and fold onto itself. 90 degrees turn. Let it stretch and fold onto itself. And the last stretch and fold it. Now just tuck the dough in. And leave it to rest and ferment. It's time to check on our dough to see if it needs more attention. And you can see that the dough has kind of relaxed out to the sides and is a little bit stretched out. So we need to firm it up. We're going to repeat the process from last time. I'm going to wet my fingers reach down on the sides and lift the dough up, and you can see it's quite relaxed, and fold it onto itself. Let it hang and stretch and fold it. Now I'm using a little bit of a different method here. So grab it and kind of tuck it in onto itself. Now just let that relax, tucked in. So you can see the bubbling going on. That's the fermentation. So now this goes to rest, and we'll repeat the process once more. It's now time to check on our dough the third time. But first I'm going to prepare a basket for the dough to rest in overnight. And my dough quantity is a little bit too small for this size, so I'm going to make a cushion for the dough, which takes up a little bit of space as well. So I get the shape that I want, because no matter how you shape your dough, it's the container in which it rests in that's going to determine the shape. So I'm using a linen cloth. For the dough to rest in, and I'm going to use a little bit of rice flour to flour the basket in the cloth, which acts as a barrier and prevents the dough from sticking. You can now see there's a lot of activity going on, and the dough is rising quite a lot because all the energy is ramping up, and it's time to stretch it a third time, because now the breakdown process, the fermentation, is very high. So we're going to repeat the process. Wet my fingers a little bit just to help release the dough. Just let it stretch and fold it on top of itself. Other side, let it stretch. And let it stretch. And then I'm going to tuck it in and fold it onto itself, just like that. And then tuck it in like this before you leave it to rest. Here I have a little bit of apple cider vinegar that I made myself, and I use this to clean my table. You can see there's a lot of activity in the dough here. You can see there's quite a large doming, which means the energy is rising. And you can see all the small bubbles, that's the fermentation sites. And it's definitely time to get this dough onto the table and give it a little bit of a shape, and then leave it to rest before we give it its final shape. So I'm going to flour the table. I'm going to flour the dough. I'm going to use my scraper, tuck the sides in and release it from the bowl. I'm going to turn it upside down. Remember, this is our top side. So now, this is the sticky side. Just gently flour it and push on it a little bit to release the gases, just gently. Now, this is where you can grab the dough. Just bring it out into a rectangle, like this. Now we're going to fold the dough onto the middle and gently push down. We're going to take the top side over. Now we're going to turn it. Might need a little bit more flouring, don't worry. Now we're going to turn it onto itself and tuck it in and leave that to rest. We're at the final stage before we're putting the dough away to rest overnight before baking it tomorrow. And the dough has now had time to relax on the table, and this is where your confidence comes into play, because you're going to have to handle this quickly and confidently. So use a little bit of flour. We're looking for a simple shape. We're just going to make it into a round shape and then put it away in the basket. So use your scraper. Gently flour. Now fold the ends in onto themselves. And now turn it over and use your hand to tuck and drag it in. That's enough. Use your scraper, create that tension, and then flip it onto your hand and put it in there. Now this is ready to go into the refrigerator, because that energy we want to preserve, so that when we put it in the oven, the energy ramps up at an increased rate and create that spring. So just make it comfortable. Put it in a plastic bag to prevent it from drying out from the fridge. And then we'll bake it tomorrow. It's now morning after, and it's time to bake our sourdough loaf. It's been resting in the refrigerator for about 10 hours, and let's have a look. You can see it's really bubbly and ready to be baked. I've prepared a razor and some cold water. I also preheated my oven. (250°C), and I kept my pot inside the oven for about 45 minutes to get it really scalding hot. So I'm going to transfer the sourdough into the pot. And now I'm going to score it. Just cut a shallow cut, but with an angle. I'm going to spray to create that steam that's going to allow the crust to form. Now we're going to bake this with the lid on for 20 minutes. It's about time to take our pot out of the oven, and what I did was to turn the temperature down from my preheated oven of 250 to 240°C while baking for the first 20 minutes. Let's have a look. That's our loaf. Now this is going to continue to bake at about 210°C for another 25 minutes. So it's been 25 minutes and it's time to check on our loaf. You can tell it's ready because of the hollow sound it makes when tapping on it. It has a nice crust, nice color. It's a good loaf.